up to 1 billion years into the future, to Mars. After millennia of Earth-bound foreplay, mankind's achievements on a noteworthy level began with its political unification and the gradual colonization of Mars. While the technology to colonize this world had existed for some time, political bickering, shifting agendas, and the sheer inertia of comfortable terrestrial usurping had made this step seem more distant than it actually was. Only when the risks clearly began to present themselves, only when Earth's environment began to buckle under the strain of 12 billion industrialized souls, did mankind finally take up the momentous task. All through the decades, traveling to and later settling on Mars had been envisioned as quick, relatively easy affairs, complicated but feasible and manageable in short term. As the push finally came to shove, it was realized that this was not the case. It had to go step by step, atmospheric bombardment by genetically tailored microbes slowly generated a breathable atmosphere in a cycle that took centuries. Later, a few cometary fragments were knocked off course to bring forth seas, oceans, water. When the wait was finally over, remnants of Earth's flora and fauna were introduced as specially modified Martian remakes. When everything was ready, people came from their crowded world. They came in one-way ships, fusion rockets, and atmospheric gliders, packed to the brim with colonists sleeping in dreams of a new beginning. The first steps on Mars were taken not by astronauts, but by barefoot children on lush biosynthetic grass. The Martian Americans. For several hundred years, Mars remained as a backwater, prospering but still dim compared to the splendor of Earth, which was glowing brighter than ever before, thanks to the relocation of environmentally demanding industries to Mars. Earth could usurp everything without having to damage its tired biosphere. This was the terrestrial heyday, the climax of economic, cultural, and social development on old Earth. This, however, was not to last. Like the gradual separation of America from her European mother, planets was mutually accepted, and the balance of power hung in an edgy equilibrium. But the Terra-Martian standoff could not last forever. With limitless resources and an energetic population, Mars was bound to take the lead. Civil War. The Martian turnover was expected to occur in two ways, either through long-term economical gains or by a much shorter but painful armed conflict. For almost 200 years, the former method seemed to take effect, but this gradual stretch eventually did break in the most destructive way. Almost since its establishment, Martian culture was suffused with an explicit theme of rebellion against Earth. Songs, motion pictures, and daily publications repeated these notions again and again until they became internalized. Earth was the old, ossified home that held humanity back, while Mars was new, dynamic, active, and inventive. Mars was the future. This ideology eventually reached its semi-paranoid revolutionary apex. Roughly 1,000 years from now, the nations of Mars banned all non-essential trade and travel with Earth. For Earth, it was a death sentence. Without the resources and industries of Mars, the terrestrial heyday would quickly devolve into a pale shadow of its former glory. Since the trade of essential goods continued, nobody would starve, but for every citizen of Earth, the Martian boycott meant the loss of up to 3/4 of their yearly income. Earth had no choice but to reclaim its former privileges, by force if necessary. Centuries after her political unification, Terra geared up for war. Most thinkers and fantasists of previous times had imagined interplanetary war as a glorious, fast-paced spectacle of massive spaceships, one-man fighters, and last-minute heroics. No fantasy could have been further from the truth. War between planets was a slow, nerve-wracking series of precisely timed decisions that spelled destruction on biblical scales. Most of the time, the combatants never saw each other. Most of the time, the combatants were not there at all. War became a duel between complicated, autonomous machines programmed to maximize damage to the other side while trying to last a little longer. survivors agreed that massive changes were necessary to ensure that such a war never occurred again. These reforms were so comprehensive that they entailed not political, economical, but biological changes as well. One of the greatest differences between the people of the two planets was that over time they had almost become different species. It was believed that the solar system could never completely unify until this discrepancy was overcome. The answer was a new human subspecies, equally and better adapted not only to Earth and Mars, but to the conditions of most newly terraformed environments as well. Furthermore, these beings were envisioned with larger brains and heightened talents, making them greater than the sum of their predecessors. Normally, it would be hard to convince any population to make a choice between mandatory sterilization and parenting a newfangled race of superior beings. However, memories of the war were still painfully fresh, and it was easier to implement these radical procedures in the wake of such slaughter. Any resistance to the birth of the new species did not extend beyond meager complaints and trivial strikes. In only a few generations, the new race began to prove its worth. Organized as a single state and aided by the technological developments of the war, they rapidly terraformed and colonized Venus, the asteroids, and the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Soon, however, even the domain of Sol grew too small. The new people who inherited it wanted to go further, to new worlds under distant stars. They were to become the Star People. Colonization and the mechanical Otopi. Even for the Star People, interplanetary travel was a momentous task. Early minds had boggled over the proper, and fantasies such as faster-than-light travel and hyperspace emerged as the only solutions. Simply put, it was impossible to take a large number of people with enough supplies to even the closest star to make colonization feasible. The existing technologies could only slog along at mere percentages of light speed, making the journey an epoch-spanning affair. Enormous generation ships were conceived and even built, but these succumbed to technical difficulties or on-board anarchy Fast and small automated ships were sent forth to the stars. On board were semi-sentient machines programmed to replicate and terraform the destination and construct its inhabitants from the genetic materials stored on board. A bizarre problem plagued such attempts. The first generation of humans to be manufactured sometimes developed a strange affection for the machines that made them. They rejected their own kind and perished after the massive identity crisis that followed. This technological Oedipus complex was not uncommon. Nearly half of all the colony founding attempts were lost through it. Even then, however, the remaining half was enough to fill humanity's own spiral arm of the galaxy. The Summer of Man. Right after mankind's colonization of the galaxy came its first true golden age. Reared by machine prophets, the survivors of the Oedipal plagues built civilizations that equaled and even surpassed their solar forebears. This diffusion across the heavens did not mean a loss of unity. Across the skies, steady flows of electromagnetic communication linked mankind's worlds with such efficiency that there was no colony that did not know about the goings-on of her distant siblings. The free flow of information meant, among other things, a vastly accelerated pace of technological growth. What couldn't be figured out in one world was helped out by another, and any new developments were quickly made known to all in the realm that spanned centuries of light. Not surprisingly, living standards rose to previously unimaginable levels. While this did not exactly mean a galactic utopia, it was safe to say that the people of the colonized galaxy lived lives in which labor, both menial and mental, was purely compulsory. Thanks to the richness of the heavens and the toil of machines, each person had access to material and cultural wealth greater than that of some nations today. During all this development, a curious phenomenon was observed. While alien life was abundant in the stars, no one had encountered any signs of true intelligence. Some attributed this to an overall rarity, while others went as far as divine influence, resurrecting religion. Regardless of the theorizing, one question went truly and puzzling creature, considered so because it had every hallmark of terrestrial animals on an alien planet. Justifiably named Pandora, the colossal fossil belonged to a bird-like creature with enormous claws. Later research determined it to be a highly derived Therizinosaur from a lineage of herbivorous dinosaurs that died out millions of years ago on Earth. While every other large land animal on that colony world had 3 limbs, a copper-based skeletal system, and hydrostatically operated muscles, Pandora was a typical terrestrial vertebrate with calcium-rich bones and 4 extremities. Finding it there was as unlikely as finding an alien creature in Earth's own strata. For some, it was irrefutable proof of divine creation. The religious resurgence, fueled at first by mankind's apparent loneliness in the heavens, got even more intensified. Others saw it differently. Pandora had shown humans that entities powerful enough to visit Earth, take animals from there, and adapt them to an alien world, were at large in the galaxy. Considering the time gulf of the fossil itself, the mysterious beings were millennia older than humanity when they were capable of such things. The warning was clear. There was no telling what would happen if mankind suddenly ran into this civilization. A benevolent contact was obviously preferred and even expected, but it paid to be prepared. Silently, humanity once again began to build and stockpile weapons, this time of interplanetary potency. There were terrible devices capable of nova-ing stars and wrecking entire solar systems. Sadly, even these preparations would prove to be ineffectual in time. Q. The first contact was bound to happen. The galaxy, let alone the universe, was simply too big for just a singular species to develop intelligence in. Any delay in contact only meant a heightening of the eventual culture shock. In humanity's case, this culture shock meant the complete extinction of mankind as it had come to be known. Almost 1 billion years old, the alien species known as Q were galactic nomads, traveling from one spiral arm to another in epoch-spanning migrations. During their travels, they constantly improved and changed themselves masters of genetic and nanotechnological manipulation. With this ability to control the material world, they assumed a religious, self-imposed mission to remake the universe as they saw fit. Powerful as gods, two saw themselves as the divine harbingers of the future. This dogma was rooted in what had been a benevolent attempt to protect the race from its own power. However, blind, unquestioning obedience had made monsters of the Q. To them, humanity, with all of its relative glories, was nothing more than a transmutable subject. Within less than 1,000 years, every human world was destroyed, depopulated, or even worse, changed. Despite the fervent rearmament, the colonies could achieve nothing against its billion-year-old foes, save for a few flashes of ephemeral resistance. Humanity, once the ruler of the stars, was now extinct. However, humans were not. Man extinguished. The worlds of humanity, gardens of terraformed paradise, seemed strangely empty to the Q. Often there were no raw materials available other than people, their cities, and a few basic niches of ecology, populated by genetically modified animals and plants from Earth. This was because humans had erased the original alien ecologies in the first place. Offended by another race trying to remake the universe, the Q set forth to punish these infidels by using them as the building materials of their vision. While this led to a complete extinguishment of human sentience, it also saved the species by preserving its genetic heritage in a myriad of strange new forms. Populated by ersatz humans, now in every guise, from wild animals to pets to genetically modified tools, Q reigned supreme for 40 million years on the worlds of our galaxy. They erected kilometer-high monuments and changed the surface of entire worlds, apparently to whim. One day they departed as they had come, for theirs was a never-ending quest, and they would not, could not stop until they had swept through the entire cosmos. Behind them, the Q left 1,000 worlds, each filled with bizarre creatures and ecologies that had once been men. Most of them perished right after their caretakers left. Others lasted a little managed to survive. In them lay the fate of the species, now divided and differentiated beyond recognition. Worms. Their world lay under a scorching sun, its intensity made monstrous through the interventions of the bygone Q. The surface lay littered with husks of dead cities, baking endlessly like shattered statues in a derelict oven. Yet life remained on this unforgiving place. Forests of crystalline plants blanketed the surface, recycling oxygen for the animal life that teemed underground. One such species, barely longer than the arms of their ancestors, was the sole surviving vertebrate. Furthermore, it was that planet's last heir of the Star People. Distorted beyond recognition by genetic modification, they looked for all the word like pale, overgrown worms. Tiny, feeble feet and hands, modified for digging, were all that betrayed their noble heritage. Aside from these organs, all was simplified for the life underground. Their eyes were pinpricks. They lacked teeth, external ears, and the better half of their nervous system. The lives of these ersatz people did not extend beyond digging aimlessly. If they encountered food, they devoured it. If they encountered others of their kind, they sometimes devoured them too, but mostly they mated and multiplied, and managed to preserve a single shred of their humanity in their genes. In time it would do them good. Titans. On the endless savanna of a long-extinguished colonial outpost, enormous beasts roamed supreme. More than 40 meters long by terrestrial measurements, these behemoths were actually the transmuted offspring of the Star People. Several features betrayed their human ancestry. They still retained stubby thumbs on their elephantine front feet, now used for any sort of precise manipulation, except for uprooting trees. They compensated this loss by developing their lower lip into a muscular, trunk-like organ that echoed the elephants of Earth's past. As bestial as they seemed, the Titans were among the smartest of the reduced submen that remained in the galaxy. Their hulking stance allowed for a developed brain, and gradually sentience re-emerged. With their lip trunks, they fashioned ornate wood carvings across the plains. It was easy to see that within a few 100,000 years, humanity could start again with these titanic primitives. Sadly, as a catastrophic ice age took over the Titan's home world, the gentle giants disappeared, never to return. Predators and prey. Devolved predators were common among humanity's feral worlds. Most of the time, they resembled the vampires, werewolves, and goblins of bygone lore, hunting equally subhuman prey with a combination of derived weaponry. Some had enormous heads with large killing teeth. Others tore their victims apart with talon-like feet. But the most common kinds bore modified fingers and thumbs, bristling with razor-sharp claws. The most efficient of these predators lived on one of mankind's first off-world colonies. In addition to paw-like hands with switchblade thumbs, they also had gaping, tooth-studded jaws on disproportionate heads with large, sensitive ears. All of these served to make them the dominant predators on their home planet. They ran the prairies, stalked the forests, and ranged through the mountains in pursuit of different people. Herbivorous saltators with bird-like legs, while their prey lapsed into common animosity. The hunters managed to keep a spark of intelligence alive in their evolutionary honing. Mantelopes. Not all devolved people lapsed into complete bestiality. Some held onto their minds while losing all of their physiological advantages due to the genetic meddling of the Q. A singular species was a prime exemplar. They had been bred as singers and memory retainers, acting much like living recorders during the reign of the Q. When their masters left, they barely survived, reverting into a quadrupedal stance and occupying a niche as grazing herd animals. This change was so abrupt that the newly evolved mantelopes endured only due to the forgiving sterility of their artificial biosphere. The mantelopes, equipped with full, if slightly numbed, human minds, and completely disabled animal bodies, lived agonizing lives. They could see and understand the world around them, but due to their bodies, they could do nothing to change it. For centuries, mournful herds roamed Unfortunately, the selective forces of evolution made the agony a short-lived one. Simply put, a brain was not advantageous to develop if it could not be put into good use. A dim-witted, half-minded Mantelope grew up faster than a smart one, and grazed just as efficiently. The Mantelope's animal children overtook them in less than 100,000 years, and the melancholic world fell silent for good. Nothing was sacred in the evolutionary process. Swimmers. Perhaps because their life cycle involved an aquatic larval stage, the Q had transmuted a large number of their human subjects into a bewildering array of aquatic creatures. Taken care of by specially bred attendants, these post-human water babies came in every shape and size imaginable. There were limbless, ribbon-like varieties of eel people, huge whale-like behemoths, decorative people who swam by squirting water out of their hypertrophied mouths, and horrifying multitudes of brainless wallowers that served as food stock. All of them were perfectly domesticated. All of them went extinct when their masters left. All save a few slightly mutated, generalized forms. These swimmers still resembled their human ancestors to a large degree. They had no artificial gills. Their hands were still visible through their front flippers. Their feet were splayed affairs that functioned like a pair of tail flukes. Recognizably human eyes peeked through their blubbery eyelids, and they spoke to each other, though not in words, and never in sentient understanding. For millennia, they swam the oceans of their ecologically stunted world, feeding on diversifying kinds of fish and crustaceans, survivors of the food stock originally imported from Earth. With the intervention of the Q gone, natural selection resumed. The swimmers became more streamlined to better catch their fast prey. The prey responded by getting even faster, or evolving defensive countermeasures such as armor, spikes, or poison. Their evolution back on track, the swimmers drifted further and further away from their sentient ancestry. They would wait for a long time indeed to taste that blessing again. Lizard herders. They were the lucky ones. This was partially due to the total absence of predators on their garden world, resulting in no advantage for intelligence. Furthermore, the Q had made some small but integral changes to their brains, tweaking the structure of the cerebellum so that certain features associated with heuristic learning could never emerge again. Once again, the reasons for these baffling changes remained known only to the Q. The dumb people eventually settled in a symbiosis with some of the other creatures that inhabited their planet. They began to instinctively farm some of the large herbivorous reptiles, ancestors of which were brought from Earth as pets. Soon, the balance of this mutualism began to tip in the reptiles' favor. The tropical climate of the planet gave them an inherent advantage, and they underwent a spectacular radiation of different species. They encountered no competition from the only large mammals on the planet, the brain-neutered descendants of the starfarers. Faced with a reptilian turnover, the only adaptation the sub-men could muster was to slip quietly into bestial oblivion. Tempter. In the Tempter's case, the remodeling was done with an almost artistic enthusiasm. How they managed to survive in their bizarre form was not clear. Their ancestors were used as sessile decoration, and through some miracle of adaptation they had endured. No human would have recognized them as their descendants. The females were beaked cones of flesh, some 2 meters tall, rooted in soil like grotesque carnivorous plants. The males, on the other hand, resembled contorted bipedal monkeys. Unlike their mates, they were perfectly ambulatory. Dozens of them ran around the females' mounds like so many imps. Some would gather food, others would clean the females, while others would stand guard for danger. Although their actions looked purposeful, the males had no will of their own. In Tempter society, females controlled everything, using a combination of vocal and pheromonal signals. They guided the masculine hordes into any number of menial tasks, while mating with the strongest, the most obedient, and the dumbest to produce even better drones. On certain periods, they would also give birth to a few precious females who would be carried away by subservient males to root themselves. centuries had fate not intervened. As a stray comet obliterated the Tempter's Mound forest, one of humanity's best chances for re-emergence was cruelly swept away. Bone Crusher. Through the deliberate modifications of dew and the blind molding of evolution, the heavens came to be populated with creatures that would put the myths of their ancestors to shame. Their ancestors were pint-sized pets of dew that were bred for the dazzling colors of their tooth-derived beaks. When their masters left, most of these pampered creatures died, with no one or nothing left to take care of them. But some, belonging to the hardiest breeds, survived. In less than a geological eye blink of a few million years, the descendants of such creatures radiated into the evolutionary vacuum of their garden world. One lineage led to a profusion of human herbivores. These were preyed upon by a variety of enamel-beaked raptors, each evolved to deal with a specific prey. Among these generalized niches were entire assemblages of specialized animals, resembling anything from ibis-billed swamp sifters to splendorous forms with bizarre crests that flared out of their toothy beaks. There were even secondarily sentient forms in the shape of the ogre-like bone crushers. To an observer of today, they would indeed be the stuff of nightmares. 3 meters tall and hairy, sporting vicious thumb claws and enormous beaks that suited their scavenging diet. Despite their shortcomings, these corpse-eating primitives were one of the first species to attain intelligence, and although primitive, a level of civilization. All of this proved the fallacy of human prejudice in the post-human galaxy. A creature could feed on putrefying meat, stink like a grave, and express its affection by defecating on others. But it might as well be your own grandchild, and the last hope of mankind. In eventuality, however, not even the bone crushers fulfilled this promise. Their dependency on carrion for food limited their population severely, and their medieval civilizations crumbled after a few uneventful millennia. Colonials. Their world had given the toughest resistance against the Q onslaught. So tough, in fact, that they had turned back to successive waves of the invaders, only to succumb to the third. The Q, with their twisted sense of justice, wanted to make them pay. Even extinction would be too light a punishment for resisting the star gods. The humans of the rogue world needed a sentence that would remind them of their humiliation for generations to come. So they were made into disembodied cultures of skin and muscle, connected by a skimpy network of the most basic nerves. They were employed as living filtering devices, subsisting on the waste products of Q civilization, like mats of cancer cells. And just to witness and suffer their wretched fate, their eyes, together with their consciousness, were retained. For 40 million years they suffered. Generation after generation were born into the most miserable of lives, while absorbing the pain of all